And now, ladies and gentlemen, the bravest keynote speaker in the history of the summit, because he's the last one before the coffee break. So that's the only thing you want to always squish out of, but he said, no problem for me. He comes from Axis Communications. He loves smart city solutions, and he's the guy who would like to predict what will you do in a near or far future. So he'll be talking about something called Trends Driving the Security Industry 2019, example of integration of technologies for detecting human behavior. So that's a great thing to have in the future, especially when you want to take out the lady for a dinner. So I'll be calling you next time again. He is Joakim Palmqvist.
Thank you. First, I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to attend this great event. It's truly an honor to stand here. So, back to the presentation. The presentation is divided in such a way that we have the trends. I'm going to talk about the trends, how they're positioning, but briefly cover the theoretical part and more focus on the real implementation that we have been piloting, testing, etc. So there will be more focus on the movies, the images, etc. that we have been working on to see how the trends are flying, and then we connect them. Before I forget it, I would like to emphasize that I'm referring to the ecosystem. So when I'm referring to the ecosystem, I'm talking about how the trends are tied together. Because much of the information we already know, and we had keynote speakers before, they showed us what's going on and where we are progressing. Tomorrow we'll have a keynote speaker talk about AI. So I'm not digging into AI per se or those kind of technologies because we already have them. So let's start. You could potentially discuss what kind of trends do we have. But based on the fact that we are in the security industry in this room, and we based on the fact that we are in the IT sector, we have the most significant trends. These are the 6 most significant trends, and you can actually group them together, so you do have different groups. So let's start with the 2 first, so we can move on to see how they actually fly in reality. And we talk about artificial intelligence and edge computing, and I would like to challenge you. Because when I see these two together, I think about the kitchen. Right? Everybody think about the kitchen when they see this. My point is that artificial intelligence doesn't fly by its alone. It needs to be somewhere. So let's dig into it. It needs to get the data. It needs to receive the data, the right data, and also the data in right time. So you could think about artificial intelligence as the chefs in a kitchen. Without any tools, without the infrastructure, no food. Now, we know this, and moving on, artificial intelligence per se is something which we in the industry has been not reluctant, but we are slowly progressing there. The car industry, for that example, they are much ahead of us if you compare to what they're doing today and what we are able to do. And there is a reason for it, because the security industry, in its DNA, is a little bit more conservative. So let's look into the rest of the guys who is belonging to this one. We talk about cloud and edge computing. These two are very interesting because that's trends which are working against each other. I'm representing the cloud service. I want to commoditize every device, IoT devices out there. I'm representing the guys who have the IoT devices. It's not the commoditization. I want to push the data to this guy over there. So I'm standing here as a cloud guy again. I'm trying to do some sort of example. The cloud and the edge devices, they work against each other, and that's the driver by itself, because they need the AI to make everything fly. Again, now we have a full kitchen, so we can prepare the food. So what kind of things can we detect? This is just a theoretical background. When we talk about trends and detection, we tie it into human behavior based on the edge platform. So now going back to the ecosystem which I was talking about, you have the edge devices, you have the cloud, and inside the cloud you have the AI. And that's general for everything which you will encounter when it comes to the trends. So the edge devices, what kind of problems, issues, or challenges do they face? We have crowd management, we have traffic management, etc. We also have something which we say consumer behavior, which is the one which is up to the right. Consumer behavior. Okay, so this is not really in the security sector. It is because the cameras is already there, or the devices are already there. And since we have demographic, we know who bought what. Because we know age, we know gender, etc. And that's the reason why we have pilots going on where we have commercial popping up depending on who is passing the screen. They know the consumers, and that's the way they increase the sales. Nothing to do with security per se, but it's mapping and it's feeding up to the cloud, and we know suddenly who is doing what. By security reasons, of course, and the commercial. Now, I think the movie seems to be... Did it crash? I had such a great transfer. But anyway, the last trend in the stage was about cybersecurity. Because when we collect all data, people, unauthorized people, want to be there. And the previous speaker just talked about that. Yes, we have shut down sometimes because of people are intruding the system and getting data. So let's talk about next two drivers. Personalization versus cybersecurity. Cybersecurity per se is a trend which is driven very, very much because we collect data today, how people are behaving. We collect data, we know this. So we need to store it somewhere. And personalization per se is a way of showing. So let's assume that I walk into a store. Now we are driven by GDPR. I walk into a store and I see a camera. I have my rights to say, hey, you're recording me. And they need to be open to say, yes, we're recording you. Okay, I would like to see what kind of data you store about me. And if you are, you have to delete it because I don't want to be in the system. And I, as taking care of everything, need to remove it. So now it comes to next step. I need to have a traceability. I need to be able to find you in the system to delete you and then prove you. The trend by itself is a driver, and it's also driven by GDPR. So it goes hand in hand with cybersecurity. This trend is cybersecurity, if you would like to say, is divided by many layers. And the most obvious one is the technical solution. We have these kind of policies, password policies, and we have IT department investing tons of money in the company. And in the end of the day, everything works perfect. And then you have your employees, and it screws up. Because they will come out with ideas how to overcome the struggle with password handling, with certificate, with VPN connecting. And we found out during the years that one of the biggest threats, that's not the big organizations. That's me as a private person when I grab my laptop, my cell phone, whatever, and I take it home, and I surf on it, and things on malware starts to download. Then I go into the corporate network, and boom, there we have a leakage. That's something to keep in mind. So how do we overcome it? It's the mindset. The mindset among people to be aware that, yes, I'm working for a company or a city for that sake, and I am a port, a gate into the data which could be violated. So, moving on. This is the reason. I'm not allowed to say which system we are using because that's more or less an agreement that we are not allowed to make commercial. But this is a supervised system, and this is actually what I'm talking about. That's the reason why we have so high requirements when it comes to personalization and cybersecurity. What we do here, what you see is a full-blown map from Sweden where we map income, people's education level, how they are moving within a city. I can grab a map and look into, say, I would like to know everybody in this area, which is 35, plus minus 2 years. Income. So why do we collect the data? Because then we can increase the service. Now remember, we talk about, before we used to talk about verticals. Verticals like banking, infrastructure, critical infrastructure, transportation. Today we don't have to do that, really, because everything is inside the city. Every city in the entire world will be exposed for the challenges, and they also need a service to provide for the reputation and the citizens. So everything is done within the city. That's where they store the data. Now, moving on to the two last, and from my perspective, I think these are the most interesting one because that's more tangible. Now, going back to the ecosystem again. We have the ecosystem where we have the edge device, we have our cloud, and we have the AI. Here we talk about environmental smart tech and sensor integration. Long, fancy word, but let's look into what this really mean. Sensor integration, smart technology is basically another way of utilizing already existing equipment. And I give you one story. A company not far from our headquarters, 5 years ago, so they were pretty early. 5 years ago, they started to correlate the sales in an open landscape like this. They had over 100 sales guys in the same landscape. And what they did is that they correlate the background noise with the sales figures. In that way, they started to ramp up the way they do the architecture of the landscape to benefit from the noise level, because people are screaming. And you can think about it yourself. If you have a Monday morning, most likely very, very quiet. Friday afternoon, maybe not so quiet. And then you can see the sales figure, how they correlate against just the background noise. And that's the HR department driving it. So it's a very strong factor. But it's more than that, right? Let's have an example. A practical example where we are ramping up. Let's use a camera. There it goes. Whew. Let's use a camera which actually look into rain. This is a typical summer day in Sweden, by the way. And it detects rain. It not only detects the amount of rain, it also detects what kind of rain we have. And then, what do? By thresholds, we can prevent floodings. We know a couple of streets where it will be floodings. So the camera on the edge already says, hey, stop. You need to send someone there to block the road. So we are preventing instead of detecting. It's just not just a... And by the way, the algorithm shows that we are not violating GDPR, because GDPR by itself says that no personal data, and here we see it doesn't send anything except just data. Moving on. We do have the same with snow. Maybe that's not a problem here, but we have problems in Northern Europe where snow is piling up on roof, on the houses, and it damages the car. It kills people in Stockholm, for example, and other cities. It kills people because the camera doesn't only say it's snowing, it says what type of snow. So it sends the data, say, hey, it's time for you guys to climb up at the roof and clean it up, because otherwise people will die. Now we talk about security. Still, we're utilizing a camera which is already there for another purpose. What about this one? A camera who tells me how far I can see. It happened on the edge. We are still on the edge, and we transfer the data up to the cloud. And it gives me, when we do the integration, if I have a port application or I have a bridge or a road, etc., it gives me a prevent prediction to know that, yes, we need to lower the speed, etc. All in all, pretty cool to transfer cameras into to a weather station. But the real value is this. Same camera now can classify each lane depending on snow, rain, ice, heat, cold. And it lowers the speed automatically based on how fast we can drive our cars. Okay, now we actually are back in track. We are hitting the car industry. Not hitting, sorry. We are actually following up with the car industry. Because if you think about it, years ago, if I purchase an expensive, let's say, expensive car, I don't have to mention a brand, they sold me, oh, I have so many airbags and the collision zone. So when you crash, we protect you. Today, they don't talk about the airbags anymore. They talk about driving assistance, preventing a car crash. And it's the same here. Because in the end, we would like to avoid situations like this. The camera today can predict car crash. But the real value comes when we actually can prevent them by interacting with you, human beings, to say, hey, you need to lower the speed because the road conditions. So it's by itself a trend, a technology driven by how it is. If you ever go to northern part of Europe and you're driving on the European highway E6, you will see those kind of cameras, which from the beginning was just as a common regular surveillance camera, and now they are equipped with this kind of software and heavily tested. Next driver, sensor integration. I think this is the hardest part. Because how do you make sure your sensors out there can communicate with the system I will talk about? Going back to the ecosystem, device, cloud, and AI. How can we make sure? Do they send JSON files or an encrypted message? Second one, how do you mount it? Incredible often, just to put out there, and that's the hardest part, to actually mount the camera. We did an integration of a tunnel project where we were assigned to decrease the crime rate in an area by detecting graffiti and robbery, etc., in tunnels, because people feel unsafe in tunnels. And we figure out, when we did the integration, testing and installing, we realized that, there is a saying, the last mile is the most expensive one. Last mile is the most expensive one. And it's very true. But in this case, it was even worse, because 1.5 meter data cable and power cable took us 3 months to get in place. Not because we didn't know how to do it, because the city, in this case, didn't know who take responsibility for it. And it's so much more than that, because if you start to drill in a tunnel, you destroy the surface, and then you lower the life expectancy. So there are many regulations you have to consideration. So my point is, it's not just pointing a device there. It's harder than that, and it's pretty pricey. So how did it work? The result from this example worked out that we could detect people painting, doing graffiti, robbery. The camera started to trigger robbery. And in the end of the day, we detected also, we could pull data. So now the city knows not only when people are moving in the area, they also know who it is. Going back to the trends. All trends together we have today, they work as a single individual driver. But if you think of it, together, when you combine them into an ecosystem, they give you basically the image of the trend drivers of tomorrow.